You're listening to the Current Reality Podcast, where we talk about staying anchored in biblical reality within the current of modern culture. I'm Michael Cleary. With me is Wade Thomas. We're on staff at Christ the King Church in Cincinnati, Ohio, which makes this podcast possible. And today we are going to talk about population control, World Economic Forum type stuff. This dreaded thing that some people want to scare us into believing that there are simply too many people on planet Earth, and the only way for us to be sustainable in the future is to get rid of some of them. So, Wade, I'll kick it over to you.
Does it sound like we're at the bottom of a well? Should we tell them why it sounds differently in case it does?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. We're in a room right now. It's kind of like a prison cell, but it's at the basement of our church where we keep our children on Sunday mornings because we don't love them enough to give them a padded room. So this is a room that has cement blocks. And if you hear our reverberating voices, that's why they're repairing our AC in our normal studio. So maybe you can't hear it, but if you can.
It's been like a month that our AC's been out.
Yeah.
And it's really been, it's fine.
Yeah.
I'll kind of let you know just like how much we are blessed and spoiled with modern conveniences. I think about this a lot. It's like I've had to preach the last few Sundays without air conditioner, and the room has been not overwhelmingly hot. It's May in Cincinnati.
We got the lights too. That makes sense.
Yeah, but yeah, you got the lights from the stage area coming down. But I've thought it's a distraction, and it's a distraction. Like for me when I'm preaching, I just feel hotter, more just kind of. The room is a little stuffy, but I look out and I see people like fanning themselves. We've got the front door open, cars are driving by out in front, and I can tell that people are just kind of hot and uncomfortable, and that does get in your mind. And so I'm like, man, I've been reading for our family dinner time, just little snippets of a Spurgeon biography. And the thing I read yesterday, it's like he would preach to like 29,000 people at the peak of his ministry. And I'm like, there's no amplification, and there's no air conditioning, no comfortable rooms.
He was probably wearing a tie, probably a suit coat too, I'll bet you. He was
yeah, probably. And he was a big dude.
Yeah.
So he probably was pretty sweaty. But anyway, so yeah, that's why the room sounds cavernous and kind of echoey. Yeah. But I've got some little tricks and tools that I can use on my computer to hopefully reduce that.
I'm sure any of our listeners in Arizona or Texas or Alabama are probably like, what are you guys complaining about with your 81 degree weather in Cincinnati when it's 100?
Texas, I think like in the wintertime it gets down to like 85 degrees or something.
Exactly. Okay, all right, so population control. So any of us who are under the age of 50 probably have grown up in a world in which thinking that there are too many human beings is like normal. I remember seeing the movie Fern Gully when I was a kid. Pretty much every sort of environmentally themed TV show or movie kind of had this smell of people are okay, but there's too many of us, and that's why trees are getting cut down, and trees getting cut down is really bad. And it just kind of had that flavor. And that is a relatively new thing in human history, to just kind of be a self-loathing, to have a humanity-loathing philosophy that sees the world as this pristine apartment that we are just temporarily leasing, and we better not dirty it up before the next tenants move in. And it comes from a lot of different places. It has a lot of different sources, but I think the headwaters that I would want to point out to people, and we just published an article about this yesterday on the website, but the headwaters that I would want to point out are the Darwinian headwaters. So basically, for most of human history, different cultures would have slightly different takes on this, but the normal assumption was that God, the divine, created human beings.
Yeah.
And that those human beings he created, the divine created, had significantly more value and merit and consumed more of his attention than army ants and dolphins and palm trees. There was something. So whether it's the Greeks or the Romans or African cultures or Central and South American cultures, obviously pagan cultures that weren't Christian had significant problems with their treatment of human beings. But it was a pretty normal feature of humanity to go, we got made by something supernatural, and we are worth more than bugs and animals and bushes. And then in 1859, so the world of Darwinian evolution, the world in which Origin of Species was published, was already starting to buck against that in a proud, egocentric way. But in 1859, when the Origin of Species got published, that's really where, from that moment on, to be an intellectual heavyweight began to require believing that we were really no different than any other animal. I mean, we could think more, we could talk more, we built bigger things, but really, us orangutans, humpback whales is all the same.
Yeah. Even in pagan religions, the idea that could be like, well, there's lots of gods, and there's some transcendent reality that is above us, and even if we don't have this exalted, lofty sense of being created in God's image, there is a sense of, well, something made us, and even if that thing doesn't like us, we have to do what it wants.
Right.
Whatever the god or goddess wants, and there's this whole drama and narrative playing out in the pantheon of gods. But still, there's this sense that we have to act in a certain way because there is some divine being above us. And whether it be the true God of Christianity that created us in his image, and there's this glorious picture in the Bible of us being made in his image, or some other perversion of it, there was always this sense that we're not just matter.
Right.
Which is the Darwinian view. And my understanding of this, you can correct me if you know this better than I do, but my understanding is that there was never really any scientific or some validating belief that could enable atheism to expand. It was like you had some people that would kind of reject it, but it was like, well, then you got to explain how we got here.
Right.
And if you couldn't explain how we got here, then atheism is untenable. And that's why Darwin was such an atom bomb, that his publication of The Origin of Species gave some explanation for how we got here, and at least for where science was at the time, it seemed plausible enough. And I think what it did really was people that wanted to hate God, wanted to rebel against God, it gave them
Intellectual cover.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that is right. So I mean, like, even I'm reading a biography of Cicero right now by Anthony Everett, and Cicero he did not, where other guys in the Roman civic life at that time were like cutting open birds and reading their entrails. And okay, well, it's going to rain tomorrow because
it's a bad omen.
He despised that. He kind of heaped scorn on that sort of thing. But even he wrote a book, and I can't remember the name of it, but he basically says, well, look, I don't like all of the superstitious stuff that my Roman peers do, but clearly the gods made us, and he's thinking of Mars and Jupiter and Ares and those gods. But basically, he said it's undeniable. We got here because the gods made us, and that he's incorrect about the number of gods and who they are. Right? It's Yahweh who made Cicero and made the world Cicero lives in. But that is basically, that's the normal human experience up until Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin and a few other guys kind of gave an intellectual veneer to, okay, we can deny that there's anything supernatural. And so that Darwinian philosophy kind of created an air in which hating humans isn't quite as obnoxious and isn't quite as weird. Well, we're a dirtier, more advanced form. We dirty up the planet, and we're just a slightly more advanced form of chimpanzee.
Yeah.
And chimpanzees don't have as big a carbon footprint, so there should be less of us and more chimpanzees. That's kind of I think the Darwinian air is what made this stuff able to grow. So I'm going to read to you. The World Economic Forum is. Dun dun dun! Like, I don't. You have to have some kind of scary over.
Yeah, we need like a soundtrack where the music goes to a minor key, decidedly minor key right now. Because if you were to take Thanos from the Avenger movies and turn him into like a global political empire with hundreds of people, CEOs, billionaires, and so on, Thanos would be the World Economic Forum because they have exactly the same goals.
Yeah.
And that is the reduction of the human population in the world.
So a guy that Michael and I will commend to you, a Christian guy named Larry Taunton, he's got a great video called What is the World Economic Forum? It's great because he's not a conspiracy theorist, alarmist. He's not like, I roll my eyes, at YouTube videos where the title is all caps and like it's some
7 reasons why the World Economic Forum wants to destroy you.
Exactly.
Number 6 will blow your mind.
Exactly. Like oh my gosh, it makes me cringe inside so much. But so this is an actual thoughtful, intelligent man who's been to Davos for the forum, I think multiple times.
You just said something I think is important to note. Like Larry Taunton went to.
Right.
And so this was a big part of the podcast that he released. He says like he talks about being big into primary sources. I want to be in the room where the conversation is had and not just read about it in a journal or watch it on TV.
Yeah.
So he had familiarized with them enough to kind of know what he was getting into, and then he went to Davos. Where is this?
Davos is in Switzerland. I think it's a small municipality in Switzerland.
Okay.
And I think that's where the actual event, the annual, I'm pretty sure it's annual event, happens every year. I think there might have been a couple years where they were going to have it in like Singapore or something. But he went there. Taunton went there. Intelligent Christian man. And do you remember in that video where he talks about how he was just waiting for people, like so he didn't buy tickets, he would just got a table in the coffee shop or whatever, and as people were coming out, he would just start conversations with them.
Yeah.
And he would ask them, he said, do you remember, what do you think about the WEF's, because he said everybody there calls it the WEF, not the World Economic
Forum.
What do you think about the WEF's point that we have to reduce the global population to, and it was a number, I think it was like 1 billion or something.
But reduced by 1 billion?
I think reduced to 1 billion, regardless.
That is what he said. Because it was like, take what we have now, which is about 8 billion.
Right.
We need to, and this is the thing that it just is insane to me. Like there are 8 billion people on this planet right now.
Yeah.
And so what they are proposing, and this is not some kooky guy that is a little unhinged and he's got a YouTube channel in his basement and nobody knows who he is.
Every head of state speaks at this thing.
Yes.
Every major corporation.
This is like, imagine the United Nations, something of that level of sophistication, credibility, money, power, influence. Heads of state, CEOs, billionaires, many, many, many billionaires. And the reason why he didn't pay to get in is because it's like 25 grand just to get a ticket to this thing. So they're going in there and they're talking about, but it's couched in such compassionate, this sort of heartfelt language of, it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it.
And academic kind of sounding language.
Academic speak, and I can pull this up here and read something from it. But what he's talking about is reducing the population of the planet from 8 billion to 1 billion. So the elimination of 7 billion people.
What weirded me out, so you're going to play that or play a part of it in a second or pull something up?
Well, I've got a clip from Larry that I can play, but that'll probably be better later on.
Okay.
But from their website on the About Us thing, I just think maybe I should save this for the sophistry. Okay. Never get to the sophistry, I'll read that.
Well, so I will. I'll just point out. So when Taunton, what I found, really arresting about his telling this story of how he would ask everybody who would sit down at his table at the actual forum, what do you think about the WEF's goal of reducing population to 1 billion? He said they would all respond with like, well, we really need to do it. I mean, it's some version of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, nobody said, I didn't know that's what they're doing here. Like nobody was like,
it's like, what?
I thought this was just like a jobs conference. You know what I mean? Like
I thought I came with a stack full of resumes to hand out at the World Economic Forum.
If I'm at a World Economic Forum and I just take that at the name of the thing at face value, and then I find out we need to reduce the population by 80%. I'm going to be like, what?
Yeah.
What did I come to?
And they don't say it.
Right.
Like they don't say it. I mean, that's the thing. It's like they will say it. It's not like you have to completely guess. They will say it, but they'll say it in ways that sound like they're just, it's like, man, I really hate that I have to do this. And he compared it to Nazi guards in Auschwitz whenever they were put on trial in Nuremberg. And he said the way they spoke about it is just like, like they saw themselves as the hero of the story doing what nobody else is willing to do. They were doing the dirty job.
So that is, I'm glad you brought that up, because Nazism, and this is in the article that we published yesterday at King's Domain, Darwinism is Poison, and you've probably drunk some is the name of the article. But I bring that up because I quote from, there's a big 1,000-page biography of Adolf Hitler by a guy named John Toland. It's like 40 or 50 years old. I read it a couple years ago, mind-blowing, lots of primary sources. But he basically just, here's who Adolf Hitler was. Nazism and Adolf Hitler himself, his anthropology was totally Darwinian, totally Darwinian. And so Nazism, like Klaus Schwab, held to human beings are highly developed animals, and we should think of their. I think Hitler called it our Lebensraum or something, but it's a word for living space. Like, we should think about the land that we occupy and the kinds of people we let have children in those terms. What do you do with horses and dogs? You breed them, and you're not trying to have too many of them, and you're not trying to produce ones that are lame and can't walk or can't smell or whatever. You're trying to, and that is how a Darwinian thinks. And so if you had said in any other age of human history, hey, there's this guy and he's going to be a really influential worldwide figure, and he thinks it'd be a great idea if we reduce the population of humanity by 80%. Pretty much any other generation would have found that as evil as it is. But in a world that has now been drinking Darwinism for 150 years, it doesn't sound as evil because there are too many of us, and we're just one animal, and we're taking up too much space, and there's less space for parakeets.
Well, there's one thing that you said that
you should quit smoking.
Excuse me. I'm not
I'm kidding.
I've got a little. It's like I'll choke on my spit sometimes. And I'm drinking coffee while we're recording. I've just got this little tickle in the back of my throat. Maybe I'll edit that out, or maybe I'll just treat you listeners.
It adds an element of humanity to the podcast.
People can listen to us cough and think, man, I feel like I know them. Okay, so I'm not exactly disagreeing. I'm adding a kind of a twist on what you said about they think like Darwinists. And I would say, like, a true Darwinist, a consistent Darwinist has no alternative but to be a nihilist, because Darwinism is predicated on the assumption that the material universe is all there is. There is no God, there's no transcendent being. And if material universe is all that exists, then that means we are merely atoms that are bumping together and chemicals reacting at a certain temperature that creates this illusion of rational thought. And so even the words that we're saying are nonsense. It's meaningless. Even the thing that we think of as love and compassion and family and meaning and purpose, those things are meaningless totally. And so Darwinism, if you're consistent, will produce a nihilistic worldview. And those people, there are some nihilists out there, and the more they consistently try to live nihilistically, I mean, it's like they are insane. They're just utterly insane. And so people live as though the biblical God exists, even though their worldview does not support such a view. And that's what these World Economic Forum people are doing. And so what they are doing is, so basically, like Nietzsche said, God is dead and we have killed him. And he was not saying that in a celebratory way. He was talking about, like, this is, like a lot of his writing was about talking about the effects of the fact that God is dead and how it will play out in society. But if you think about God is dead, that's what Darwinism does. Darwinism gives you the idea that there is no God at all. And so if that's the case, then we are God. There's nothing above us. We are the most sentient, highest, most rational creatures in the world. And so we get to decide what is and is not true, what is or is not good or bad or evil or moral. And so this clip I want to show you is from somebody, this is Jane Goodall. She's 80 years old, and she says that in the clip.
It's the famous gorilla lady.
Gorilla?
Yeah, that was like her thing. She was in Central Africa following gorillas around.
I think she studied gorillas, not like guerrilla warfare. Or
no, not like gorillas. Yeah,
gorilla.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she studies, she studied gorillas, but she is an agenda contributor and a UN messenger of peace. And so just here is a clip, and I'll just play it into the microphone so you can hear what she has to say. It's about 45 seconds long.
My name is Jane Goodall. My age is 80. My job is giving people hope. If I'm allowed to change a few things, if I just have this magic power, I would like to, without causing any pain or suffering, reduce the number of people on the planet, because there's too many of us. It's a planet of finite resources, and we're using them up. But what I really, really, really would love to change is the unsustainable lifestyle of everybody else. We're just greedy.
Okay.
By the way, would she call a gorilla greedy for eating too many leaves?
Well, she said, like, I want to give people hope. This is such an absurd thing. I want to give people hope. And then the next thing she says is, we're too greedy, and how we're living is unsustainable. So I want to, without any pain or suffering, I want to kill 7 billion people without any pain or suffering. So she's doing this with this compassionate sort of disposition, but she's saying it. I'm like, if you are a Darwinist, if you're a materialistic naturalist, who cares if humanity survives? Who cares if humanity starves to death? And who gives you the right to determine that you are the one that should determine that we should eliminate people? How many? And I am certain that you're one of the ones that will survive. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're one of the ones that will be, the unfortunate recipient of the deaths of 7 million people. It's an absurdity. So I'll play one other clip, and this clip is from Larry Alex Totten that we talked about at the beginning. So this is how, and I'll put the link to this podcast episode in the show notes. You got to listen to this.
Mm-hmm. It's great.
And I'll just confess to you, it's like I'd heard of the World Economic Forum, and I heard, this is a bad thing. People complain about it. I didn't really know what they were all about, and I tend to stay up with things. I try to stay on top of the big actors and players in the world, but I did not know this was their stated agenda. And so I did a Twitter poll yesterday just to see, and I asked on the Twitter poll, how many of you that answer this poll, let me see here. I'll pull it up. Okay, help me out. How much do you know about the World Economic Forum's primary purpose and goals? 264 votes, 12% said they know a lot, 58% said they know only a little bit, 30% said they know nothing.
Yeah, and that 12% they would probably be the kind of people I wouldn't want to have lunch with, because it's just going to be insufferable.
Yeah.
Anybody who's like, I know a lot about the World Economic Forum is probably the kind of person who.
But get this, like 30% of people know nothing about what the World Economic Forum, and of course.
That's probably how they want it.
Yeah.
They don't want us to know. They want the CEO of BP to know.
Right.
They don't want you and me to know.
And folks, hear me on this. This is a highly scientific poll, which I happen to...
Peer reviewed.
This is on Twitter. No, it's a stupid Twitter poll. But let's just say, if this is even remotely representative of humanity, I think it's probably better. I think people that follow me on Twitter are probably a good chance that they're more likely to be aware of this sort of thing. But even then, 88% of people that answered my very highly scientific poll, they don't know anything about what the World Economic Forum's main purpose and agenda is, which is to eliminate 7 billion people. Okay, one last thing.
Only the 12% who know anything about it get to stay alive. The other 88%, it's like, come into this room here that we have reserved for you.
Well, that's the thing. Like, oh my gosh, there's so much I want to say here. Like, Bill Gates is a big player in this. Like, one of the richest men in the world.
Yeah.
And Bill Gates is a big player, and wouldn't you know it? So Bill Gates owns like an insane amount of land in the Midwest, farmable land that he buys and controls whether or not it's farmed. And so he's a big part of this. And wouldn't you know it, he was a big player in the COVID-19 pandemic and in the PR and the messaging. It's like, that was, when I listened to this podcast, it was just like, there were some dots connecting in my mind that was really kind of freaky. Because I'm like, man, like the kooky conspiracies that that you just want to dismiss. I'm like, come on, that's crazy. And I'm like, you know what? Whenever you've got the World Economic Forum, that is massive organization, that has billions of dollars, all the tech leaders, world industry leaders, heads of state that are part of this thing, $25,000 a head to get into this thing. Mm-hmm. Their stated objective is the elimination of some of the human population, upwards of 80% of the human population. And then you've got guys like Bill Gates that are acting and saying in such a way that sounds like, man, he really believes this and is trying to bring it about through the way that they're treating the pandemic. You would have thought that they saw COVID-19 as a dream come true. And then, all right, here's the thing. I'll play. This is a clip from Larry Taunton. This is the beginning of his podcast.
Do you know what's interesting about all these people? None of them are volunteering to off themselves. Bill Gates is an old guy. It's the late 60s, I think. Has he offed himself? I don't think so. He's still flying around in a private jet telling us all how we need to reduce our carbon footprint. The carbon they want to reduce is you. You're the carbon they want to reduce. They're like the people in 1984. They're the individuals, in Huxley's Brave New World. They're more like them. They're the individuals who know the truth, but they keep everyone else kind of happy on Soma while they themselves make the hard choices for humanity. And they're the ones who bear the burden of it all. And that's the way Hess sounds. That's the way Maul sounds. It's terrible having to kill these people. It had to be done. That's the way the World Economic Forum sounds. That's the way Dennis Meadows, when I hear that interview with Dennis Meadows, I think of Otto Moll. I think of Rudolf Hess, and I go, oh, wow, there are people like that still walking around on planet Earth who say, I hope it can be done humanely, peacefully. I hope it can be done with civility. And that's why the World Economic Forum is at core fascist. I hear people say that it's Marxist. It's not Marxist. By definition, you cannot be a billionaire and a Marxist. You cannot. They are fascist. They believe in the strict regimentation of the economy for war against you. That's what ESG is. ESG is about the weaponizing of the economy against the consumer, against populists, which is just a way of saying ordinary people.
Man, that's a haunting line. Mm-hmm. The carbon footprint, the carbon they want to reduce is you.
Right.
You are the carbon they want to reduce. That's horrifying.
So I think, so you're not wrong that like a consistent Darwinian, a consistent atheist would basically not have, it would not, they wouldn't have a philosophical reason, an ontological reason to get their juices flowing about more or less people, because more or less people is no more philosophically or ontologically meaningful to a nihilist than more granite or more marble or more hydrogen or more, it's just another molecular thing. Who cares if there's more people?
There is no meaning, because meaning itself is a function of intelligence.
So if you were consistent nihilist, a consistent atheist, that would be true. I think what happens is, so Darwinism has turned in Jane Goodall's mind, it's turned people into animals, and they are her least favorite animal. That's basically what's happened. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, we're all animals.
It's like humans are like possums.
We probably couldn't have too many gorillas for her. You know what I mean? But the people, we're a gross animal that she's not a fan of, or she's a fan of only in particular doses. And so that's what I think, that the Darwinian world in which we're just animals, that's what it created. Okay, so let me read to you in our Taste of Crazy here, where we give you some credible examples of the craziness of the thing that we're dissecting, which in this case is this misanthropic hatred of people. This is from an academic paper on sustainable development goals. So sustainable development goals, SDGs, that's a concept of the World Economic Forum's. The United Nations has adopted it. And Larry Taunton points out sustainable in WEF language, in World Economic Forum language, is not just like we hear the word sustainable and we think, oh, it's good. Sustainable means less people, because people just eat too many plants and animals. There's too many of us. So sustainable always means that. It doesn't mean just the thing that you think it means because you have used the word sustainable before. So SDGs are Sustainable Development Goals. Here's a bit from an academic paper on it. Unfortunately, so they're talking about birth rates and population growth in different parts of the world. Obviously, everybody who's connected to the WEF and wants to be thinks that's bad, thinks population growth is bad. The paper says this: unfortunately for Africa, its high population growth rates are not accompanied with significantly fewer children per woman. That's what they would want, fewer children per woman. Rural fertility rates controlled for population density are on an average 2 children higher than other countries in the global south. This difference is less a result of a desired number of children, but more of unmet contraception needs for women. So hold on. So I cannot think of a more paternalizing, so the supposedly, because I'm sure these people are all left of us, right? So all these people are the anti-racists. That is the most paternalistic sentence I could imagine. It's basically saying Africa has too many people, and we know it can't be because that the moms want them. It must be because we didn't give them enough birth control pills.
They have unmet contraception needs.
It's so...
Oh man, what contempt they have for people.
That's what you know what they would say. They would probably look at an orphanage filled with African children and be like, those are a result of unmet contraception needs. If only the moms of these kids would have had birth control pills. And then it says this: in the 1980s and 1990s, China benefited from having 2 economically active persons for every 1 inactive person. Let me just real quick define for you what inactive person means. A baby. That's how they define a baby. They define a working mom, a mom who goes to her cubicle every day and gets paid to process insurance forms. She's an active person. But this 6-month-old who needs breastfed is an inactive person. Do you see how this kind of colors even just the way you talk?
Even the word economic is used purely in a financial marketplace.
That's exactly right. So a mom who is at home caring for 4 or 5 or 6 children, she is not economically active. Even though, by the way, what does the word economic come from? Oikonomia, which means household, right? Watch Little House on the Prairie sometime and tell me Carolyn Ingalls isn't economically active. Like,
yeah, it's such like thin myopic thinking.
Correct.
Of what like an economic activity is purely that which can translate directly into dollars and cents. And so it's like, if you're not drawing a paycheck from an employer for the work that you do, therefore you're not economically active because we can't tax you for it.
Right.
And I think that's probably a big part of the goal.
Absolutely it is. So mom at Procter & Gamble, who is sitting at a desk all day and processing forms, she is economically active because she is producing revenue. That revenue can be taxed. And me as a board member or a middle manager or an executive at Procter & Gamble, I'm financially benefiting from that lady's work. And it doesn't help me at all if she's got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 kids and she leaves and goes and takes care of them. It's such a thin view of humanity and life, a contemptuous view of human life.
Yeah.
But it says in the 80s and 90s, China benefited from having 2 economically active persons for every 1 inactive person. So they love mom and dad working, and they have 1 kid. That's a benefit. China, good job. While sub-Saharan Africa, oh, poor Africa, had a ratio of 1 for 1. So it's sad that Africa only had working dad, non-working mom, vocationally working, getting paid, getting taxed dad, but not mom. Mom wasn't working. Oh man. And can you imagine how much they would hate working dad, non-vocationally working mom, and 3 kids? Oh, yeah. Now we got a ratio of 1 to 4. Oh, no. We want the working parent ratio to always be above, the numerator to be higher than the denominator.
Yeah, it's such an insulting way of thinking of people, and like just the way that it reads, it's dripping of this contempt and like condescension towards sub-Saharan Africa, which in their mind, I can imagine them thinking, it's like, man, like these poor folks, they don't have their contraception needs met, and so they're stuck with these horrible children. If only they could join us in the enlightened West, and we compassionately should find ways to make sure that they can have sex without babies.
Right.
Because look how much good it's done for us in the West.
Look how happy all of our 42-year-old middle management women are who haven't ever had children. They're just ecstatic.
Yeah, they
That's
love
the
it.
typical experience of a woman who turns around at 40 years old and never had children. They're ecstatic. And then the last sentence here, despite the one-child policy, rapid population increase remains a major labor market challenge for China. So we all know the one-child policy. We're going to force Chinese parents to get abortions after the first kid. Nobody can have a second kid without significant penalties. And despite that thing that this academic paper exhorting a WEF term, despite that great one-child policy that they love, rapid population increase remains a major labor market challenge for China. This is how they view babies. So let me give you just one more taste of crazy, one more guy, and his name is Paul Ehrlich. You said you quoted him recently in a sermon, right? And I think I remember that sermon. You were in 1 Peter?
Not positively, just so you know.
Right, no. But that wasn't 1 Peter, right? You were, because I remember that wasn't too long ago.
What I was talking about was the religion. So it was the text in 2 Peter talking about judgment, the judgment of God coming, and the earth will be melted up and burned up. And I was saying, like, there's a counterfeit of this, which is the global warming myth.
Yes.
Which is like the earth will assert a sort of naturalistic judgment of the earth goddess Gaia, who will, because of the sins of our failure to steward the environment. And so it's just this, it's a fake ripoff counterfeit of the biblical view of judgment, where the earth is asserting a judgment in this materialistic sense.
Yeah, so for them, the actual sins against the actual God, like sodomy, that's not a big deal.
Yeah, that's not a big deal.
But you know what is a big deal? You having babies.
Yeah.
That's a sin against Gaia.
Because that's not sustainable.
All right, so, which, by the way, sodomy is not sustainable either. Paul Ehrlich.
But that's the first form of birth control.
That's right. Paul Ehrlich. So he's a biologist. I think early on he was with Stanford University. I don't know if he still is. Regardless, he made a big splash in, I believe it was the late 60s with the Population Bomb. Population Bomb was a book that really, we'll put in the show notes a link to a New York Times video that does a fairly objective critique of the book and of Ehrlich's thesis, which is that basically in the next few decades after the book, if there's going to be mass starvation because the world can't hold this many people. Obviously, it's been almost 60 years now since he published it, and that hasn't happened, and we'll talk about that. But that does not stop Ehrlich from continuing his messaging, which he does in an article in The Guardian. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from that article, just a paragraph or two. So this is The Guardian interviewing Ehrlich, who says there are too many people. The solutions are tough, Ehrlich says. To start, make modern contraception and backup abortion available to all and give women full equal rights, pay, and opportunities with men. Now, I don't think he's saying that because he just loves women. I think he's saying that because he hates babies. I hope that would lead to a low enough total fertility rate. Thank you for proving my point in the next sentence. That the needed shrinkage of population would follow. But it will take a very long time to humanely reduce total population to a size that is sustainable. He estimates an optimum global population size at roughly 1.5 to 2 billion. And quote, but the longer humanity pursues business as usual, the smaller the sustainable society is likely to prove to be. We're continuously harvesting the low-hanging fruit, for example, by driving fishery stocks to extinction. Ehrlich is also concerned about chemical pollution, which has already reached the most remote corners of the globe. Quote, the evidence we have is that toxics reduce the intelligence of children, and members of the first heavily influenced generation are now adults.
It's better dead kids than dumb kids.
Exactly. And but listen to the contempt he has even for adult human beings walking the globe now. And if you didn't hear it there, you will in a second. Ehrlich treats this risk with characteristic dark humor. Quote, the first empirical evidence we are dumbing down Homo sapiens. Note, he's got to use the Latin term. We're just an animal. We're dumbing down Homo sapiens. Were the Republican debates in the U.S. 2016 presidential elections and the resultant caucustocracy. That's a rule by the worst or dumbest. On the other hand, toxification may solve the population problem since sperm counts are plunging. I mean, just it drips with absolute hatred for humanity. And one more quote from him from that New York Times video. I transcribed it. I listened to him saying it. You watch the man's face and you just hear the words come out of his mouth, and it's a very surreal thing to hear genocidal words come out of a man's mouth. And he's a man who our entire elite world would respect and revere. But here's what he said. The idea that every woman should have as many children as she wants is to me exactly the same kind of idea as everybody ought to be permitted to throw as much of their garbage in their neighbor's backyard as they want.
That is...
What's the obvious implication there?
He must be a great neighbor that really keeps his lawn clean and doesn't throw any garbage in anybody else's yard.
The analogy between the two only works if children equal garbage. And that is how he sees them. It's clear.
I want to throw something in here.
Yes.
So I looked something up real quick to check the dates on this, and this is fascinating. A few months ago, I wrote an article that I can link it in the show notes about. The title is How Planned Parenthood Laid Out a Roadmap to Destroy Society in 1969. And this article was based on what is called the Jaffe Memo.
By the way, I think that's the same year Population Bomb came out, or thereabouts.
Well, that's the date that I checked. Population Bomb came out in 1968.
Okay, all right.
So there's a connection here. So 1968, big, massive book. Paul Ehrlich, still around, still spouting his drivel. The blight on this planet, and to be sustainable as humans, and to be sustainable, we have to eliminate them. 1968. 1 year later, this Jaffe Memo was published, and this Jaffe Memo was published by the Center for Family Planning Program Development, which at the time was a branch of Planned Parenthood, but now it is known as the Guttmacher Institute, which does a lot of study about abortion. So already there's an ominous note being struck by even who published this thing. But what I want to just read a couple highlights, lowlights, I should say, from this article. One is, here's a quote: the continued U.S. population growth will inevitably cause a deterioration in the quality of life of this and future generations. This can be described as an ecological position, or as the ecological position. Next number, that an explicit U.S. policy to encourage or compel smaller family size in the U.S. is necessary to enable our government effectively to encourage or compel developing nations to move in similar directions. This may be termed the international public relations position. So basically, they're saying, like, we want to have policies in the United States, and this is a policy advocacy kind of memo. Policies in the United States that will lead to population reduction, and I'll share a few examples here. And that will essentially be hey, we're leading the way, so then we can compel upon the developing world, other nations, to do the same thing. So here are some specific examples of, I'll read quotes directly from the Jaffe Memo, and what I have here is a photocopy of, it's a digitized photocopy with little things highlighted. You can read this if you want. And all of these are on one page, bullet point style. And whenever I first read this, it's like my jaw hit the floor, because I'm like, this is 1969, and it is like basically a step-by-step plan. This is how you reduce population in the United States. Tell me this doesn't sound familiar. Here we go. Number 1, postpone or avoid marriage. You get people to do this. Alter the image of the ideal family size. Compulsory education of children. Encourage increased homosexuality, encourage women to work. You modify your tax policies. So a substantial marriage tax, child tax, tax married people more than single, remove parents' tax exemption. You get bonuses for delayed marriage and greater child spacing. And then you'll get some kind of treatment, some tax benefits or treatment for chronic depression. And you'll require women to work and provide few child care facilities. Then there's a list of social controls: compulsory abortion, compulsory sterilization of all who have 2 children, except for a few who would be allowed 3. Final few here. This is under the label pregnancy. Payments to encourage sterilization, payments to encourage contraception, payments to encourage abortion, abortion and sterilization on demand. Now, those are just some of the lowlights, but I mean, if you were to say, how do you remove all the incentives and all the blessings and enjoyment of having a larger family, having multiple children, having any children at all? You pay for or even compel people to be sterilized, to use contraception. You pay for abortions.
Which ended up happening in India, by the way. They ended up having forced sterilizations in India.
Yeah. And so basically, you had 1968, Ehrlich's book, massive, made a big splash. A year later, policy recommendations that were originated in the Guttmacher Institute, which was an arm of Planned Parenthood at the time. We know what Planned Parenthood is known for, which is as many abortions as possible.
And Guttmacher Institute, by the way, to this day, keeps very specific abortion statistics, and they don't hide them. It's almost like they're like,
look
this
what we
is
did.
how much business we're doing each year, guys.
Yeah, it's like look at our growth numbers. We hit our growth targets for quarter 4.
Right.
And so
Kind of like an Auschwitz guard might.
exactly. So this is 1969, and so that was, it's 2024, so 50-ish, a little over 50 years ago, 55 years ago. Have they succeeded? Well, we are now below replacement rate for fertility, not only in the United States. I saw a report on this the other day, and I haven't sourced it to verify, but it came from a reputable person that posted it on social media. But basically, worldwide, we are now below replacement level. And in places like Japan and in South Korea, it's at catastrophic levels, like irrecoverable levels. Yeah. And we're about the same in the United States. So if you connect some dots here, Paul Ehrlich, 1968, the Jaffe Memo, 1969, give it 50 years for these ideas to play out, and here we are. They're succeeding.
I mean, I can give you an anecdotal way, just because you said 68, this came to my mind, so I looked it up to make sure I remembered right. So 1968, the leading Democratic candidate for president and the guy who was probably going to win the election was Bobby Kennedy. And Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in 68. And guess how many children Bobby Kennedy had? As the guy who was probably going to win the presidency, he had 11 kids.
Wow.
Imagine somebody being the leading candidate for president right now with 11 kids. You can't.
It would be seen as irresponsible.
Exactly.
It's like, what kind of example are you going to set for our country?
And so that's just a kind of putting a human face on the reality of this stuff having gotten into the groundwater.
Yeah. Well, one other layer I'll just throw on top of this is that we've seen this from a human perspective. I would say if we just back up and look at a spiritual angle, human beings are made in the image of God.
Right.
Satan hates the image of God.
Right.
He has since the garden, had it since the rebellion. And so this is a direct attack on the image of God. It is demonic. And so it is not at all a stretch or conjecture to say the World Economic Forum has a demonic, satanic agenda of reducing the image of God on the earth. Now, they'll call it sustainable population control. They have their ways that they'll talk about it. But spiritually speaking, it is very much, I think, an appropriate conclusion to make. This is a wicked, demonic agenda that, we don't see the demonic forces at work behind the human actors, but it's undeniable to me.
Hell loves abortion, hell loves Darwin, and hell loves the World Economic Forum's depopulation agenda. Absolutely. Because hell hates humans, because hell hates God. In a sentence, here's kind of what we're saying. So this is the lay of the land, or the bumper sticker version. You'd have to have a big bumper sticker because it's a sentence with a semicolon. But here in one sentence is what we're saying. Human beings are not a plague on the planet. They are the most valuable creation of God's, whom he knits together, makes in his own image, and commands it to be fruitful, multiply, and subdue the earth he made. And once you think of it that way, it reframes how you even... It makes all this, how many people should we have kind of question, sound as asinine as it is. I put on as I was writing that article and just kind of thinking through these things, I posted on Facebook, the world needs more people, not less. And I had a Christian ask me, how many more people?
Somebody asked you this since you posted it.
Yeah. And I just thought, before I even answer this, how gross and weird is it that question would arise in our minds? No Christian throughout human history, I think, would have that question arise in your minds. Well, how many? That's kind of like, hey, I want my church to grow. I want to see more people saved, more people brought to Christ. Well, how many more? Our church can only hold so many.
Yeah. What kind of faith do we have with that? There's a lack of faith indicated by that question. So if somebody told you tomorrow, we're going to see, 300 people that are going to be saved in this mass revival in church, and they're all going to join Christ the King Church, we would not for a second would we hesitate or bemoan that. We'd be like, praise God, hallelujah. Right. Now let's figure out how are we going to disciple them.
What a wonderful problem to have.
Yeah,
look at all these people.
We'll have to figure out a way. It's we will find a way, because what we just heard was such a blessing, and that is what a heart of faith would respond, because we have the faith to trust God for those kinds of things.
Right.
But whenever you think, well, do we have faith to trust God's word in something that isn't such an immediate spiritual impact, such as just a growing population? I mean, I would say we trust God because God's word says, be fruitful and multiply. The creation mandate from Genesis 1 has not been rescinded. So what are we going to do if we have 20 billion people on this planet? Well, you know what?
The maker of the planet also made those people.
Right. And God created us. Do we believe God made us? And do we believe God put us here for a purpose? And do we believe God spoke with his word? If we're Christians, these are very, very simple things we should acknowledge. So it's a test of faith. Do we trust God that he means what he said?
Right.
And that God will providentially work out whatever difficulties may arise? I mean, probably. The thing is, human beings are themselves a resource.
That's exactly right.
And we're not just, it's like we're treated as though humans do nothing but consume. They're just nothing but consumers. I'm like, well, they're creators and consumers. And within a typical household, whatever the demands are of the consumption of your household, then you're going to need to create enough resources, generate enough wealth from within your household, do the work that is required in order to match the level of consumption that is required by your household. Those are reasonable things. So 20 million people or 20 billion people, this earth is capable of sustaining 20 billion people.
Because we bring things out of the earth. You, listener, are listening to this on your phone or in your car Bluetooth or whatever. Everything you're using to listen to this was made, designed, and delivered in trucks by people. You take away 5 billion people from the earth and you leave us with only 3 billion, you've got none of that. You've got none of that.
You've got the Walking Dead.
And you are likelier to starve to death. That's the thing. So I've got stats here that show this in New York Times. So right now, if you take away 7 billion people on earth, you are likelier to starve to death, not less likely.
Well, come on, Wade, that's ridiculous.
Okay.
I'm just going to go to Kroger, and there'll be fewer, there'll be fewer people competing for the same resources.
Yeah.
So I'll just go to Kroger, and maybe there's nobody to
fewer people to feed them pigs, fewer people to slaughter them, fewer people to bring it to the store in packages, fewer people to fix the air conditioning.
Well, Wade, we'll just put them in. We'll just freeze the food, and so that way it'll last. You know,
like everybody did for most of human history before there were 6 billion people. So let me tell you what most of human history was like before we had all these people.
You mean like freezing food and preserving it that way?
Yeah,
is a modern luxury enabled by human beings that have come into existence.
Which is why. So here's a graph that the New York Times used in that video of Paul Ehrlich. So in 1969 to 1971, the percentage of people who were undernourished in developing countries in 1969 to 1971 was about 35%. About 35% of people in developing countries were undernourished in the late 60s. Then a decade later, 79 to 81, it was down to about 25%. So there's more people on Earth, but 10% fewer of those in developing countries are malnourished, are starving. Fast forward another 13 or so years to the early 90s, 90 to 92, and we're getting closer to 20%. And then you get into 2010 to 2012, and there's closer to 10% of developing countries where people. So you keep adding people to planet Earth, and a lower and lower percentage of people are going hungry. Because everything we eat was grown, processed, delivered, engineered, put together by people. And I realize some of our folks who, hate modern food might be like, but it's all got seed oils in it. Okay, fine, whatever.
How do they say it again?
I don't know.
It's got seed oil. It's all got seed oil.
Yeah.
Like, so what's the problem with seed oils?
I don't know. I'm not even saying they're wrong, okay? But just hit pause on that for a second, that you don't like some of the ingredients. In 1931, a couple years into the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl's going on or whatever, if you are in, a rural town in Kansas, you could actually starve to death, okay? Fast forward to 2024, and there is basically no excuse for starving to death in the United States, essentially. Upstairs right now in a basket in our copier room, we've got protein bars, bags of pretzels, bags of popcorn chips. Together, that whole basket at Sam's might have cost us $5 to buy in bulk. That didn't exist in the Great Depression. It didn't exist 150 years ago. Why does it exist now? It exists now because there's 8 billion people on Earth instead of 2 billion. That's 6 billion more thinkers. And yes, they're sinners. And yes, they make mistakes. And yes, they start wars. All that is true. But they are actually image bearers of God. And every single one of them goes out into the world and does things that chimpanzees can't do.
Yeah. So can you explain the idea, or I can if you don't want to, but just the idea of a zero-sum game with the world?
I think you would do it better than I would.
The idea of a zero-sum game, this is the thinking of the modern left. And it's I don't know if I would say it's Darwinist necessarily, but it is the way that a lot of...
It's a materialist probably, right?
It's a materialist thinking. But the thing is like their wealth can be generated. And so if you think of the earth as one great big pie, and so right now, there's one pie and there's 8 billion slices of pie. And so if we can all be fed now, well, if you got 10 billion people, that means everybody else gets a smaller slice of that pie. That is zero-sum game thinking. The way that we're advocating, I don't know if it's got a name, just Dominion or something, but the name...
The Bible.
But the Christian worldview says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Subdue it is an idea of cultivating the resources that are latent within the earth. And it takes more than just arms and muscles for one guy to get it out, but it takes a diversity of gifts and strengths and ways of thinking and innovation and creativity to cultivate the resources so that you're making more pie.
That's exactly right. You're making more pie. So you got the guy driving down your street, and picture I'm standing on my suburban street right now, and there's a guy who drives by in the garbage truck. Okay, so he gets all the cans and then he's gone. Now here comes the mailman in his mail truck, and he's delivering all the packages, some of which are from Amazon, and my wife needs him to manage the household. Okay, now he leaves, and now there's a Spectrum truck that's going to install some new internet cable so that people can. All of these guys whose parents chose to have a son, right? Mm-hmm. And then I see a lady, pushing her stroller down the street, and she's got 3 or 4 little kids in it. And those 3 or 4 little kids are going to grow up someday, and they're going to produce children, and they're going to, all of this stuff we enjoy, which is good and proper, was made by people. It didn't fall off of a tree. And if you've ever gone by, I think a lot of these Paul Ehrlich types, I think they think you just get all these people off and everything will be Central Park or whatever your favorite park is. And I'm like, if you ever drive by uncultivated, undeveloped land, it ain't a park. There's weeds everywhere and giant bugs everywhere. Like deer don't even want to live in it. You know why deer like suburbs?
So let's say the difference between where we are now and the way it would have been back in the colonial times or the Little House on the Prairie times. Yeah. So there's a Little House on the Prairie picture that comes to mind, which is Mom, Pa, and the Ingalls family. Yeah. They go and they cut down a tree and they make timber and 2x4s out of it or whatever the size are, and they build a cabin, and they have within themselves all the skills needed to live as homesteaders. The other image is from the movie I Am Legend. Have you seen this? Will Smith?
Yeah.
And
haunting opening.
Yeah, right. It's this thing where he's living in this city, and he happens to be one of the few people in the world that had some immunity to a virus that had wiped out the whole planet. And so he's got this entire city all to himself. And so he's got his sports car, and he's able to go to a gas station and there's nobody there. So he's able to just pump some gas out of the gas station and drive his car around. And in a way, there's a part of me when I watch that there's a part of me that thinks, that'd be kind of fun.
Sure.
It'd be kind of an adventure. Of course, there's zombies that come and kill you at night, but that's a different thing. But to think that we would not be able to survive because the skills have been so distributed across a broad population to where I don't have to have all those skills. I don't need to know architecture. I don't know how to start a fire without matches or a lighter.
But you do know how to do things that other people need from you.
Right. And so that's the whole thing about having a greater population, is that who knows if the cure for cancer could have been aborted.
That's exactly right.
The person who would have developed the medical research and the technology.
We have aborted a great deal of good human history.
Yeah.
Murdered it and thrown it into dumpsters.
And it's a disproportionate number of them are African American.
Yeah.
We've aborted a lot of black babies.
Yep.
Because Guttmacher Institute, Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood from the very beginning targeted who they thought were, less valuable populations. Because if you're a Darwinist, you get to you can just decide might makes right. That's how we got here, and that's how we're going to operate. And the white man is on top right now, so white people are just going to determine that black people are less valuable, and so we're going to target them for elimination through abortion.
And to a Darwinist, by the way, I think it's entirely plausible to them that, well, those people who are closer to where we started in Central Africa anyways, they're probably further behind us on the evolutionary scale just a tick, So that's how Hitler thought.
Yeah, there are people that believe that.
So you're 100% right. So yeah, it is not, God uses human beings to make more pie. Darwinian evolutionary assumptions, including that humans are merely the most developed animal, they buttress this misanthropy. They support it. So by thinking human beings are merely the most developed animal, it's easier to hold us in contempt, the way you might hold in contempt like a bat that's in your attic. Because my neighbor there, he's just some gross bipedal ape. I mean, that's what the movies taught me. Okay, let's bring the Bible to bear on it. So we got a few scriptures here, the Bible and historical Christian thinking. Genesis 1, 26 through 28. I want to read to you, I'm sure scriptures that you're familiar with, but please let the words sink into your mind and heart, listener. And if you're not familiar with them, let these words reframe the way you think of human beings. Genesis 1, 26 through 28. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, and God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over every fish of the sea and the birds and the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." God made us in his likeness, in his image, blessed us, and gave us a job. "This earth I made, you produce a ton of you, and subdue it." Would you mind reading that Psalm 127, 3 through 5, and giving any thoughts that you've got on?
Yeah, Psalm 127, 3 through 5. It says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of the warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them." The value of something is not restricted to what it can be, how that can be calculated in economic sense of dollars and cents. Mm-hmm. And he says the fruit of the womb, so children. This is a heritage from the Lord. A heritage meaning it's a legacy. It's an inheritance. It is something that God has given to us as a gift, and they came from the womb of a woman. And the fruit of the womb is a reward. So God is saying this is a blessing. This is wealth. This is prosperity. And any fair reading of the Bible would be able to easily acknowledge that God speaks of children as wealth. Mm-hmm. Children are wealth. So it's like you wouldn't be able in the ancient world be able to pull up an app on your phone and say like, well, I'm worth $500,000 in my retirement account. Your retirement account was Susie and Sally and Johnny and Billy and whatever. It's like that was your retirement account. Because that is your heritage, that is your reward. And so he speaks of them as arrows in the hand of a warrior, meaning that your children are protection. They are weapons of warfare, not in the send them off to battle necessarily, although that may happen. But children are they're more than just monetary wealth or more than just sentimental value of, oh, that's cute, that kid did something cute, or my grown children now, I feel good about them because look, they're successful. It's like, no, like there is a benefit to having them in our lives because our lives are linked together and bond together in a covenant relationship of family and a household. And the future is represented by this fruit of the womb. Mm-hmm. It is an absurdity and a crime that we treat them with such contempt in the modern world.
That's exactly right. Psalm 139, 13 through 14 takes the exact opposite tact than Darwin. And those of us who have believed Darwin's deceitful evolutionary scheme, verses 13 through 14 of Psalm 139, "For you formed my inward parts," the psalmist says to the Lord. "You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well." Your soul, like the psalmist's, should know that you and every other human being you know, the most annoying person you know, the severely autistic greeter at Walmart who greets you and tries to start some conversation with you, the person in a nursing home who can, who's like 85 years old and you're like, oh my goodness, I hope I don't live that long. All of those people that in your mind you're tempted to hold in contempt or you're tempted to be annoyed by their very existence, they were fearfully and wonderfully made by God in his likeness and image. They're not what Darwin thinks they are.
Yeah.
And then just one last one from our Lord, Matthew 19, the children coming to him, a famous story I'm sure that we're all familiar with. Children were brought to him that he might lay his hands on them and pray. The disciples rebuked the people, but Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven." That Jesus Christ, I am 1,000% confident, would not say, "Please have less children. There's too many of you all on this planet that I made."
And the Lord said unto them, act in such ways that are sustainable.
Right, exactly. We need to give contraception to these women. Okay, let me give you just a few quotes from church fathers, and I'll preface this by saying a lot of the early church fathers believed that it seems to me believed, and I think I'm doing this fairly here. Seems to me a lot of the early church fathers believed that sex really only had one purpose, which was to procreate, and that sex outside of that reason was sinful. And I disagree with them there, and it's I think fairly easy to demonstrate from Scripture that is incorrect. However, I want to let some air in from this other room in the Christian house, the church history house, because we're all breathing the air of the kind of the opposite thing, which is sex only has one purpose, and it's pleasure.
Right.
Or pleasure and emotional fulfillment. So we're almost like the opposite error. They would have said sex is only for procreation, and we're almost like, well, sex, I don't even know if it is. I mean, like maybe 1 or 2 times it should be for procreation, but the rest of the time it's about me getting it on. So let's give you a few church fathers here. I've got 3. The first is Lactantius. He was a tutor to Constantine's son, so from the late 200s, early 300s AD. He writes in the Divine Institutes, "Some complain of the scantiness of their means and allege that they have not enough for bringing up more children, as though in truth their means were in their power. Or God did not daily make the rich poor and the poor rich. Wherefore, if anyone on any account of poverty shall be unable to bring up children, it's better to abstain from relations with his wife." So basically, don't be trying to use your poverty as a reason to not have children. And I want to point out, he said that in the 4th century, when lots of people starved to death. If it didn't rain for a few weeks, my whole town might get wiped out. And here we are in 21st century America, where it's essentially impossible to starve. Okay? Yeah. And there's lots of us saying, I don't know if I can afford a 3rd kid. What are you talking about? Afford? How many bathrooms you got? You know how many your great-grandparents had? How many square footage does your house have? You know your great-grandparents probably lived in a house that was like 600 square feet less than yours or 800 square feet less than yours? I can't, the number of people I used to work with who would say that they were one of 8, one of 10, one of 12, and then say that they only had one child because they just couldn't afford it. I'm like, so your single income grandpa, or I'm sorry, your single income dad in the early 50s, he could afford it. That household could afford it. But your dual income 21st century house with a phone in your pocket that has the equivalent of what put the guys on the moon, you, with all that leisure time and extra, you can't afford it.
Yeah, and I think that that's an idea that can be graciously pushed on because we're not accustomed to thinking in those terms.
Yeah.
We're just thinking like, what can I afford? It's like we don't see, like what is taken for granted is the dream house we want. So those are the big rocks.
I got to fit the kids into that.
Yeah. So the big rocks that go in is the house I want, the kids I want, the vacations I want, the lifestyle I want. And then, okay, now we're looking at having kids, and it's like, wow, man, if the kid costs this much in diapers and wipes and all this stuff, it's like, I can't afford that, without even challenging the presupposition that preceded all of those things. And I think it's just it's a matter of teaching in the church, of just saying like, be careful with what you say about what you can or cannot afford.
Right.
Because affording often includes things that would have been considered luxuries in prior generations. And it's better to just acknowledge it. We'd be more honest if we just said, I don't want children because I want luxuries. Then now we're dealing with more the realities of the heart.
Right.
And it's more ugly whenever we say it that way.
But more truthful.
It is uglier, but truth often is ugly. It's like, and that's why, grown men, grown women, mature Christians, we need to deal with the ugliness in our heart. And we'll get to that in a moment, but just the ugliness in our heart of just seeing like, I don't really value children.
Right.
And I don't, this may not need to be said, but I'll say it here. It's like, I'm not, and Wade is not, of the mind that every couple needs to have as many children as possible.
Right.
What we're getting at is an attitude of contempt for the image of God in other people. And children are the least productive. Basically, all they do is they're cute. They don't fix your car for you. They don't do the dishes. It's a long-term
They're a cute add-on, like a dog.
Yeah. Well, dogs don't require nearly as much maintenance as children do. And so there's a need for us to just adjust the way we view human life. And, I'm saying this being convicted in my own heart in ways that I have done this myself.
I want the typical Christian who is doing willful barrenness, like willful, I'm married, we have sex, but we don't want kids. I want a Christian to feel as gross about that as they would about saying, I don't love my wife. Like I don't emotionally feel anything for her, but I do like having sex. Yeah. You would feel gross about that. You'd be like, well, no, one of the purposes of sex is this emotional affection I'm supposed to have for this person. Oh, so there, one of the purposes of sex can't just be extracted out.
Yeah.
Well, guess what else one of the purposes of sex is?
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of, that'll play into one of these other quotes here from, so this is from Augustine, contemporary of Lactantius, or maybe 100 years later. Augustine wrote Confession, City of God, early church father, writes in the Morals of Manichees. The Manichees were a heretical cult. He used to be a part of them. Then he became a Christian and rebuked that cult. He writes, this proves that you Manicheans approve of having a wife not for the procreation of children, but for the gratification of passion. In marriage, as the marriage law declares, a man and a woman come together for the procreation of children. Therefore, whoever makes the procreation of children a greater sin than copulation, sex, forbids marriage and makes the woman not a wife, but a mistress, who for some gifts presented to her is joined to the man to gratify his passion. That's but
that is spicy.
It is. And again, I'm trying to let some air into the room from earlier for most of church history. If you said the idea of, yeah, I married Jessica here and we're really happy. We're not sure if we want to have kids. Most of church history would have said, what?
You're treating her like a mistress.
That isn't like they would look at you the same way as if you'd said, yeah, I married Jessica here, but I also still see Jennifer on the side. What?
Yeah, I like my job, but I'm not sure I really want a paycheck.
Right, exactly. Like
I don't want to benefit, all the benefits. I just want a part of it. I mean, and the thing is, before I can imagine some listeners hearing a quote like that and be like, "Dang, Augustine, they do is nuts." I'm like, well, you're talking about one of the greatest minds ever in church history don't be so quick to dismiss something that I'm sure was not just a flippant, that's not a tweet.
No.
That he...
In his day, it might not have even registered to a regular Christian that he'd been like, yeah, duh.
Like back in Augustine's day, this would have been, people would have responded to that maybe there would have been conviction, but there would not have been substantive opposition to the general thing that he's saying.
Right.
And so even if you might not say it to the same extreme or to the same degree, it's not extreme, but to say it to the same degree, as Wade said, like let some of that air blow into the room of your heart to correct the way that you view children.
That's right. One more from him, and yes, he's a pithy man. I mean, he can also write really long sentences in Confessions that can make you fall asleep, but he also can be pithy. Augustine writes in Marriage and Continence, sometimes this lustful cruelty or cruel lust comes to this, that they even procure poisons of sterility. So
What's that?
Poisons of sterility is birth control pills, baby. Mm-hmm. That's what he's talking about. A woman or a man putting something into his mouth, into his body to make his body not produce children. Assuredly, he says, if both husband and wife are like this, they're not married. And if they're like this from the beginning, they come together not joined in matrimony, but in seduction. If both are not like this, I dare to say that either the wife is in a fashion the harlot of her husband, or he is an adulterer with his own wife.
Wow. Yeah, that's before modern contraception.
That's right. But there was apparently something that they could do to their bodies. I don't know what. I'm sure some, physician could be like, oh, this is what he's talking about.
And the thing is, like, the definition of marriage, like we view marriage in modern times as a decision that we make. Mm-hmm. But the at least the openness and attempt to have children was baked into the definition of marriage itself. And just as he said there, if you do this, you don't come together in matrimony, but in seduction.
That's right.
He's saying, like, if you divorce procreation from sex in marriage,
you don't have a marriage.
It's not a marriage.
Right.
And I don't know if that means like in more of a, like we might say, like when you said that just now, it sounds like maybe an exasperated wife complaining, I don't even have a marriage. It's like, no, I think he might be saying like, you don't have a marriage.
You do not have one.
You are not married.
And that's not Elizabeth and Zechariah. That's not, we're barren.
Yeah, not barren.
He's not talking about that. He's talking about you choosing to, we don't want kids and we put things in our mouths to make us have 0 children. We want to spend our entire marriage with 0 children, so let's swallow this poison. Let's swallow this pill that makes us not have kids. He is saying you don't even have a marriage then. And I would say ontologically you do. I mean, like if you took the marriage covenant, you do actually have a marriage and you would be committing adultery if you slept with somebody else. But I do think he has a point in that it's almost like playing basketball without a ball.
Yeah.
Like part of the thing that he had Adam and Eve joined together to do was be fruitful.
Yeah.
And you're saying, I'll take the pleasure part, not the fruit. It'd be kind of like, I think C.S. Lewis used this analogy one time. It'd be kind of like putting food in your mouth, chewing it up, and spitting it out before you swallow it.
Yeah. Yeah, bizarre.
One last one from Jerome here, translator of the Vulgate. He says, you may see a number of women who are widows before they are wives. Others, indeed, will drink sterility. So he's talking about that same kind of poison they would drink to not get pregnant. Others, indeed, will drink sterility and murder a man not yet born. And if he's talking about what I think it is, which is like to make her not get pregnant, not kill a baby in utero, then I think that phrasing is very evocative and accurate. You're murdering somebody before they even get a chance to be conceived. So we're not just eliminating human history by the babies we abort, but we are eliminating human history by trying to have as few children as possible. Okay, logs and specks, and I think we'll both have some things to say here. So logs and specks we want to pull out of our own eyes as Christians. We in the church, and I mean we, I am including myself in this. This is not like some kind of throwaway we, where really I mean you all. I'm saying me too. We have not rightly valued babies and childbearing. We have subtly acted like babies are a nuisance instead of the most natural of mission fields. This really hit me a few years ago where I started to realize like all of us, me included, are all about making disciples out there in the world. Like let's head to the neighborhoods, let's hit the streets, let's knock on doors, let's talk to unbelievers, all of which is great. But then we don't want to have children and disciple them. And it's hard for me not to think that among the Darwinian reasons is not also like, I can witness to that guy and then go. I can just leave. All I got to do is tell them about the Lord, and then I can go home and watch TV. But when I have children that I have to disciple, well, now I got to like do stuff. Like it costs me things.
Yeah.
And so just that attitude that we have of like, children aren't potential Christians that God is putting into our households, and will we believe be saved by grace through faith, and we'll get to disciple and shape. No, they're butts I gotta wipe.
Yeah.
And they're noisemakers. That's what they are. They make a lot of noise.
Yeah, and the thing is that, Wade and I talked about this yesterday, and it's an uncomfortable reality to admit it, but even our own children can be annoying.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean we don't love them. It doesn't mean that, it's like there is a place and a category we need to be able to have operative in our minds that it is work, there is cost, and
we're sinful. Sometimes
Yes.
they annoy us and it's their fault. Sometimes they annoy us and it's our fault.
Yeah. And having children, and like, I remember being chastened. So it's like, I have 4 children, and like, cannot imagine life without any of them. And I remember, to my chagrin and to my shame, that whenever with the pregnancies, with the first one, we wanted to be pregnant. Like, all right, let's go. But the second one, the third one, the fourth one, my first thought was like, oh man, what are we gonna do?
Work and money and
Yeah, it's like there was this tension. It's like I wanted to delight, but my flesh was the operative thing in that moment, and it's like it really tore at me, and so I'm just convicted. It was a conviction of the Holy Spirit immediately, and I knew it in the moment, but it was just something that was just sort of this emotion, a visceral thing that I could not really control, but just I felt a tinge of disappointment along with the delight. And whenever we got pregnant with our last, our fourth, I remember my wife Laura coming to me, and she's like, let's talk about, another baby, having another baby. And I remember telling her, and I'm like, oh babe, we're barely above, keeping our head above water right now. We're not ready for another baby. And she said, well, we're going to need to get ready because I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
And that was the way she told me.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, and I knew in that moment, there will come a day, because I'd already had 3 children.
Yeah.
There will come a day when I will have this 4th child, and I'm there now, where I can't imagine life without this child.
Absolutely.
I love my son. At least such a delight, such a wonderful child. And to think that there was ever a slightest hesitation of delighting in this child. But the difference is that he's 13 now, my youngest. And so he's at this age where I know him. I know his personality. I know his sense of humor, his quirks. I know his habits. And the whole composition of who he is delights me as his father. Whenever my wife is pregnant, I don't know all that. And so it's all in the abstract, it's all in the imagination, and all I can sense, a lot of times when we think of the future, what we see is fear.
Right.
Like, I'm afraid of what the future holds. I don't know. There's too many unknowns. I can't wrap my head around it. But once you have a child, you're like, okay, I know what every daily routine is like, and it gets more real and more doable. And so there's this, the fear of the unknown, I think, can be at least a big factor in why we're just like, oh, I can't imagine another kid. I don't know how I would handle it. There's too much work to do. And it's like, well, we figured it out. Yeah. It's like in our case, we figured it out. And now I'm like, man, I'm so glad.
That's Paul Ehrlich at a global scale.
Right.
I don't know if we can handle 1 billion people. Like, what are we going to do? The rainforest.
Yeah, exactly. You take that, and that's the thing that is convicting. You take that same sinful attitude, and then you just extrapolate it and put some scientific and sophistry language on it, and you've got Paul Ehrlich. That's right. You've got Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum. You're just like, oh, we can't handle that. That's too much. I don't want that. And then there's the temptation there is, maybe at the heart level, to hate and despise that child that you may eventually come to love.
That's exactly right. And it's easier with your children to look back and say, wow, man, I'm glad we had him because you're relationally connected. But when it's just 6 billion abstract people that we added to the planet, it's harder for you. And you need to trust that God makes people and he values them. And I don't say this as a guy who has this all, or had this all nailed down like from day one. So I think I've told this story on the podcast, but I went into marriage just having the conviction that I had reached the point where I'm like, okay, the Bible clearly calls children a blessing. And so on faith, I'm just going to trust that. And I asked my wife, I was like, are you okay with just, if he gives us 9, we have 9, like whatever he gives us, he gives us. And she said, yes. And she, I think, I'm almost positive, she like didn't just have the conviction, but like was happy about it and tasted good to her. Like, hey man, I'd love to have 20 kids. I think John and Charles Wesley mom had like 19 kids. I think they were like 2 of 19 or something. My wife would have loved that. But for me, it was just, I'm going on faith. But the idea of like, how are we going to do it financially and like noise and stuff, all of that was, I'm like, I'm kind of bracing on the front end in 2009 and 10 when we first got married.
Yeah.
And then we started having them, and we've got 7 now. It's kind of a complicated story, but we've got 7. It's important for me to say that for reasons that don't matter to you, listener, but it matters to me. We've got 7, and now there's not a single one of their personalities that isn't essential to my life.
Yeah.
My life would be significantly impoverished if you took any one of them out.
Yeah, and faith is a matter of, I mean, we're saved by grace through faith, so the faith in that sense is in the past, what Christ has accomplished for us on the cross. So that part of our faith is oriented towards history. But the way that we walk by faith every day is always oriented toward the future. I'm walking by faith into something that will happen today.
Right.
Give us today our daily bread. I'm trusting God today for food.
Right.
We walk by faith, not by sight, but walking is like I'm doing something right now into a future that I can't totally control. And there's always going to be things that, there are going to be areas right now that you think, I couldn't handle that. It's like I've heard people, whenever they experience tragedy, I hear this frequently. Somebody will ask them, a death of a child or some other tragedy. And I'm like, man, how did you do it? How did you deal with that? And they always say, it's like, I never would have thought that I would have been able to do this, but God gave me the strength I needed. And I think in your case, and in my case, with every time God gave us another child, it was a matter of trusting God. Like, I don't like noise. It's like I'm easily distractible. Can be hard of hearing. I mean, there's this, like the noise that's in a house, and there are things I might do otherwise, like having a child, like having children altered travel plans, or it alters what, the way that you would spend
time you've got for hobbies. Your vocation, how much time you can spend on your vocation. If you love your job, that's a sacrifice.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, the faith tells us that, so if we take God at his word, I believe God's word is true, and God's word tells us the fruit of the womb is a reward. There's blessing there that you just cannot, there's no comparison, there's no alternate, that there's no substitute for the blessing that being a father has. No, it's not just the fact of being a father. I mean, you can knock up some girl that you don't care about. That's not what we're talking about.
It's walking in obedience in faith as a father.
The entire composite of a picture of what a father is. All of that, the whole picture is a blessing, and we receive it as a blessing, and we receive it in its totality by walking in obedience to it. Just one other thought that there's this quote that it just popped into mind based on something we said just a moment ago, and I'll mention this and then I'll be done for this episode. There's the quote being like, one death is a tragedy, but 1 million deaths is a statistic. Mm-hmm. I think it's the way that this World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. That's a weird, he's German, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, German, Swiss, yeah.
But that's the way they think. So think maybe as a way of just changing our minds, be thinking of human beings not in the statistical way, but thinking of them as human beings, as individuals, as much as you can from an abstract view of billions. I think I have to do this sometimes of myself. Whenever I hear, it's like, oh man, there's I don't know, like you'll hear about, some gun violence and another, like a terrorist attack somewhere. And I'm like, man, 48 people were killed in that attack. There is a part of me that can tune it out pretty easily.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, 48 people, man, that's a shame. But if I stop and think, I'm like, that's somebody's dad.
Right.
That's somebody's baby. Then it becomes much more real because I'm thinking of what is the impact of that loss and how will that reverberate in the lives of those people. It makes it a lot more real. And to have the faith that that exact same thinking can apply to the unborn or children yet to be born.
Yeah. So that's like the World Economic Forum is like, well, hey, we don't want to kill Joe. We just want to kill Asia. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so abstract that like, it just doesn't make
it doesn't mean anything.
No, that's right. And I'll give you, before we close out with some hope, I'll give you one way, listener, and this would apply to moms too, but I'm speaking as a father, one way that God has blessed me, and I think he blessed most Christian dads and moms, is that with each kid and raising each kid has made me more substantial, more of who I am right now. I would be a significantly less sanctified and substantial Wade if you took away any 1, 2, or 3 of my kids. Each one of them, and I know it's that way for my wife, there are parts of her personality, parts of her, who she is right now, parts of her sanctification that would not exist if you took out my oldest son or my second daughter or they are the soil and water and sunlight that God used to bring out another flower on the vine of my wife and of myself. He uses human beings, children, to bring more out of Christian parents. All right, 3 reasons for hope. First, truth. God really is the maker of people, and he really is the maker of the earth that he gave us. So don't fret about people being on the earth. Be excited about more people being on the earth. God uses them to bring things out of the earth. That's the truth. The Bible tells us it. The Bible is right. Klaus Schwab is wrong. The gospel. The good news is for people, and the good news is proof of the value that God places on people. So let the gospel constantly make you hopeful about the worth and value of people. The guy at the gas station, who smells like pot, or the neighbor who plays his music too loud, or whatever. God made that person, and the gospel is to save people like him, maybe him. And so let that give you hope about people. Don't be cynical. Don't be pessimistic. Don't be nihilistic and misanthropic. Don't be House, the doctor from the House TV show. He just hated people. Love people. Third one is the church. We can be hopeful, church. We can show a world injected with misanthropic Darwinism what loving people, including the babies he gives us, really look like. So as you go to church this Sunday and as you go to church in the coming weeks and months, look at human beings as what they really are and ask that God would give you and your church more of them, both through babies and child rearing and through the salvation of the lost.
Thank you for listening to the Current Reality Podcast. Feel free to send us some feedback at currentrealitypodcast@gmail.com. If you found this episode helpful, consider leaving us a positive review and sharing it with a friend. The Current Reality Podcast is brought to you by King's Domain in Cincinnati, Ohio.